I'm Elisa Parenti from Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. Police say a gunman and at least one other person are dead after a man wearing a lab coat opened fire inside New York City's Bronx Lebanon Hospital. Several other people are reportedly wounded. No word yet on a motive, but police say the shooter may have been a former employee. President Trump will visit South Korea this year. He accepted an offer from President Moon Jae-in after meeting him at the White House today. The president said U.S. patience is wearing thin on North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile program. Iran denounces the partial reinstatement of the travel ban as a truly shameful exhibition of blind hostility and a measure that will prevent Iranian grandmothers from seeing their grandchildren in America. The travel suspension, which tightened restrictions on immigrants from 6 majority Muslim countries, went into effect Thursday. The Illinois House has adjourned until tomorrow without passing a budget, setting the stage for its third straight fiscal year without a budget. It had until midnight to reach a deal. This will now push Illinois into becoming America's first junk-rated state. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, a recap of tech's second quarter after stocks hit a snag in June. We'll dig into the sector's 3-month roller coaster, covering all the highs and lows. Plus, Airbnb's response to the opposition. We'll break down a new report that claims to save travelers $27 million and disrupt price gouging tactics by big hotels. And Fitbit's new smartwatch may be in peril as key talent leaves the company. We'll show you the road ahead. First to our lead. The market closes the books on the second quarter of the year. U.S. tech stocks gaining about 4% in the quarter, continuing its recent winning streak. But after a strong start to the year, volatility hit tech stocks in June, leading to big losses over some sessions. And two big cap tech stocks in particular, Apple and Netflix, rose marginally in the quarter after posting huge gains at the start of 2017. Here to wrap up the second quarter in the markets, we are joined by Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London and our Bloomberg News stocks reporter Abigail Doolittle in New York. Abigail, let's start with you. Wrap up a snapshot of the second quarter for us when it comes to tech.
So, Emily, it turned out to be a pretty interesting quarter for tech in the second quarter of this year. As you mentioned, we had very nice gains up until about June 9th. That was when the NASDAQ did hit a bit of a roadblock. Up until that point on the quarter, the NASDAQ was up about 7%, close to gaining toward what it gained in the first quarter, about 9%. And then all of a sudden we have this tech sell-off, this mysterious tech sell-off. So while the NASDAQ is up nearly 4% on the quarter, really giving some of those gains back, and partially or mainly this has to do with the weakness that we have seen in June. June being the first down month for the NASDAQ in 8. In fact, we have a great chart in the Bloomberg that exemplifies this. It is #BTV490, and it shows that the last time that we saw a monthly decline for the NASDAQ was all the way back in October. And if you recall, that reflected jitters into the election when we had a lot of tech stocks in general selling off a little bit on that uncertainty. So we've seen some uncertainty in the month of June. Wall Streeters are not really sure what's behind it. Some of it could be the end of the quarter, window dressing, managers taking profits and trying to really take advantage of the fact that tech has been so hot this year. In fact, still the top sector. But again, I think you really nailed it, Emily, with that volatility word. Very volatile quarter for tech.
Caroline, how have Asia and Europe compared?
I think it's fascinating because it was a brutal month if you look at Europe. And actually, though, Asia really going out and still managing to post 14% gain in the quarter. Get into my graph. I've got #BTV if you want to get it on your Bloomberg. Type in those magic letters and then the number 669 go. In the yellow is how Asia is outperformed. Great superlative coming from our producer, Tim, saying, look, if you check out Asia's index in terms of technology, we haven't seen this long a winning streak on a monthly basis This is all the way back in 1999. We certainly don't want to be seeing the sell-off that we saw in the year 2000. Meanwhile, though, in the white line, that's how much Europe underperformed the rest of the market. We had a brutal week. It was the worst week that we've seen since February 2016. The likes of the chip makers getting hurt, the likes of also the equipment makers, likes of Nokia, particularly underperforming. But also on the month, it was down, and on the quarter, European tech stocks were down. Is it because, of course, they're actually still one of the key outperformers on the year to date? They are still up some 12%, Emily.
Now, Abigail, biotech, interestingly, offset some of the losses in the FANG stocks and the chip sector. What happened there?
That's an excellent point, Emily, indeed, because if it were not for the biotech sector, which had its best month in the month of June in quite some time, we could have seen much bigger losses for the NASDAQ, and perhaps the quarterly gain would not have been that great. Let's hop back into the Bloomberg and take a look at a chart that we have that shows this really quite well. This is G#BTV655. It's a year-to-date chart. In white, we have the FANG trade, and you see that until the beginning of June that it had been up and away, and then all of a sudden there's declines. In blue, we have the stocks. Caroline had been talking about the weakness in chips. The same deal here. Look at the weakness there. In fact, the stocks has had its worst month in quite some time. And then if you take a look at, in yellow, the NBI, the NASDAQ Biotech Index, it had its best month since July of last year, up more than 5%. So big gains there. Behind those gains for biotech, Astika Gunwardena, a Bloomberg intelligence analyst, he has told me that there's a confluence of positive influences and data points, considering that data points for some of the biotech companies have come out very positive. That's driven the hope that there's some M&A. Plus, Emily, this sector had until recently been in a bear market, so it's a little bit of catch up in terms of investors going toward that growthier sector. But that's really been a saving grace for the NASDAQ, certainly in the month of June, and perhaps again for the quarter, really making that quarterly gain bigger than it would have been had biotech not been up in such a big way.
Now, Blue Apron ending the second day of trading below its IPO price. On the other hand, Delivery Hero in Europe having an opposite and better kind of day on its first day of trading. Caroline, tell us what happened.
Emily, what a sigh of relief for the European tech sector, because we get the biggest German IPO of the year. It is Delivery Hero. It's how you get your food delivered via an app, and it actually rose on the first day of trading. Thank goodness. At one point up almost 9 percentage points, and clearly therefore a $5 billion market cap, pleasing the investor base, who I add, one of them, main one, Rocket Internet, who owns 34%. Big sigh of relief for that company and its own shareholders. But it's interesting, the size and scale of Delivery Hero, because actually it's much bigger than its rivals in terms of the amount of restaurants it has. Interestingly, Delivery Hero has 42 markets that it's in, 150,000 restaurants. That's about 3 times the amount of restaurants that Just Eat has, and 3 times the amount of restaurants Grubhub has, and certainly more than Just Eat has. And I want to show you comparisons of how Delivery Hero now probably hopes it's going to beat out its rivals in terms of stock performance as well. Get in your Bloomberg, type in G#BTV658. You will see how the peers have currently performed since they went public in 2014. In the blue line, you're looking at Just Eat. That's a UK food delivery company, again via an app. We've seen it really outperform. It really has jumped up, some doubling since April 2014. But you've seen also the likes in the white of Grubhub doing really particularly well, up 2/3. So I'm sure Delivery Hero, the German company, is rather hoping it can see those sorts of escalation in its share price and market cap too.
Now, Abigail, Blue Apron investors seem to have gotten the jitters with the Amazon Whole Foods deal. Is Blue Apron going to have to raise money some other way?
That's a great question, Emily. So Blue Apron, as you mentioned, trading below its IPO price of $10. Initially, the talk on this IPO was well above $15. The bankers slashed it, perhaps the Amazon Whole Foods deal, but plus just the idea that perhaps this company wasn't ready to go public. Some market watchers are saying that perhaps early shareholders pressured the company to go public at a time that perhaps it should not have, represented by the fact that the price came down. Time will tell, but right now they have cash for about a year. So it would seem that they may, in fact, have to raise capital relatively soon because that IPO price was lower than initially expected a few weeks ago, Emily. A rough turn there, and certainly a tale of two stories from the company that Caroline was talking about.
Indeed. All right, Abigail Doolittle, our Bloomberg News stocks reporter, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London. Thanks so much for giving us that roundup on the quarter that was. Coming up, Airbnb says it will save customers at least $27 million this holiday weekend in the United States. We'll get the details from Airbnb's head of global policy, Chris Lahane, next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Chip giant Qualcomm is heading up the California coast. Based in San Diego, the company's venture arm is setting up shop in Silicon Valley, according to news website Axios. Qualcomm will continue to focus on the company's core areas of interest like mobile and emerging technology in the auto and connected device sectors. The group has seen success in both areas in the past, including the exit of one of its portfolio companies, autonomous startup Cruise, which sold to GM for nearly $1 billion last year. Well, much of the U.S. is gearing up for a long July 4th weekend, including Airbnb. In a new report, the home rental company documents how it plans to fight price gouging and save consumers at least $27 million on what they would have spent on hotels over the holiday weekend. This comes off the heels of reports that Airbnb plans to launch a new tier for luxury vacation rentals. Joining us now here in the studio, Chris Lahane, Airbnb's head of global policy and a former aide to President Bill Clinton. Chris, great to have you back on the show.
It's always fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you say you're saving consumers $27 million on hotel costs this weekend, more than double what you say you saved them last year.
Yep.
How do you know?
Well, we're able to take a look at what the prices were last year on Airbnb and compare them to what the prices were on hotels. And then going forward, obviously looking at this weekend, you're able to pull publicly available data. We obviously know what we're charging and what our hosts are charging, and then compare that to what the hotels are listing out there. And what all the data shows is last year we saved people about over $12 million. This year it's going to be $27 million. And what that really translates into is for the typical American family who's staying in an Airbnb over July 4th, they're going to save about $100 a night. And that's real money. We talk about how our platform democratizes travel, makes it more accessible to the middle class, and particularly families. That's actually how I discovered Airbnb. I have, like you, I have a couple boys, and back in 2013, we were traveling, and I stumbled across this Airbnb as a great way to take a family. You get a kitchen. If you're like my boys, you definitely need a washer and dryer, right, to clean the clothes. You get free Wi-Fi. It all comes with the package, and it's one of the. I think it's part of why our value proposition is so compelling to folks.
Now, this is part of a broader campaign. You're taking a more aggressive tact against hotels. Airbnb has this reputation of being the nice company. Why take on?
We definitely bring a pillow to a knife fight at Airbnb. But
this is a little more aggressive.
But what it really is just really trying to drive the consumer comparison for folks, right? I mean, earlier this year it came out that the hotel industry was mounting a massive effort at every single level to really go after the Airbnb middle-class hosts. And there's a reason for that, and it really gets down to something called compression nights. And compression nights is a technical word in the hotel industry where they purposefully try to limit supply. So on busy weekends like a July 4th or busy events like a major sporting event, they can jack up the prices. And they themselves have actually acknowledged this. You don't even have to read our report. Just look at some of their public comments. A guy by the name of John Bortz, who was one of the former heads of AHLA's political wing, runs the Kimpton Hotels. And at one point in time, he said that the reason they're concerned about Airbnb is it's impacting the hotel industry's ability to, quote unquote, gouge consumers. That's his own words as a representative of the hotel industry. And so we do want to draw this comparison because it's really important to those families who are traveling. You save money on Airbnb.
Speaking of the American Hotel and Lobbying Association, as you say, they're not going away quietly, and they say that it's not a level playing field in hospitality, that they have to spend millions of dollars to renovate their buildings. They have to spend money to accommodate people with disabilities. They say that it's not fair. What's your response to that?
I always love this conversation. So first of all, right, we're in this middle of this conversation about economic inequality and the middle class. Typical American middle class family is about $4,000 behind from where they would have been otherwise with typical growth rates. Typical Airbnb hosts, the vast majority of whom are middle class, are making about $6,000 a year, helping to close and actually overcome that gap. Doing that all without a single payer of taxpayer dollar being spent to create that opportunity. And even more than that, about a year ago, we made a pledge because the hotel industry was talking about this. We said, hey, we want to pay our community's fair share of taxes. Since then, we've put in place 250 tax agreements in the U.S. Almost 60% of all our hosts are being covered by tax agreements. And the great irony of that is the hotel industry a year ago was calling on us to pay taxes. Now they're actually opposed to us paying those taxes because they realize that we are committed to trying to make this work as well as possible for everyone. And at the same time, the whole focus on the tax conversation has also created a focus on the fact that this is an industry, the hotel industry, that has historically gotten massive tax breaks to build and locate and come to different cities. $600 million in Los Angeles over the last couple years. And so I think, as we get into this conversation, it ultimately comes back to a value proposition conversation. We're a platform for the middle class. We're a community-based platform. And we have an incredibly compelling message when it comes down to it.
What about their point about people with disabilities? Because this has been another complaint about Airbnb. Rutgers published a report. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, we're a platform that's 8 years old. We're constantly looking to evolve and put things in place. We obviously have a significant amount of housing that is available for people suffering disabilities. We obviously want to make sure as many people as possible can stay anywhere. Our mission is anyone can belong anywhere, and we're actually working with a number of the disability groups to come up with solutions on this. At the end of the day, these are regular people who are making their homes available, and we want to make sure that this works as well as possible for everyone.
Now, Bloomberg's Olivia Zaleski has reported you are launching a new higher tier service, mansions instead of just homes. What can you tell us about this and what it might add to the bottom line? Yeah,
so in January, we acquired a company called Luxury Retreats. It's based in Montreal, but a lot of their properties are in traditional vacation rental destinations. In fact, a large number of their properties are in the Caribbean. I actually just came back from a trip to the Caribbean. I know it's a really tough job I have, but I was down. And part of the trip was actually talking about how we can take advantage of the fact that there's a lot of empty homes in the Caribbean. You have people who are very successful who go down there and buy homes, but they're there for a month or two, and then those properties aren't being used. The Luxury Retreats model is to be able to take those properties, make them available. It helps bolster tourism in those markets. I mean, think about it. Global travel and tourism is now about 10% of the global GDP, growing faster than the rest of the economy, even bigger in parts like that. And how are we able to use things, particularly in a time period of sustainability, to use those homes, convert them into money makers, both for the host, but in particular for those communities that really do depend on the travel and tourism.
Any update on Airbnb's exit strategy?
I'm waiting for you to tell me. There's a time for all seasons. Really, our focus is on making sure we get the basics right and delivering on our value proposition.
Well, I got to ask,
I'm shocked that you asked that. I'm shocked that you asked that.
Have a wonderful 4th of July,
you.
And thanks so much for sharing that report with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I
Chris
appreciate
Lehane, Airbnb's head of global policy. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, Fitbit's upcoming smartwatch is already facing major setbacks. The outlook for the company's big bet on the device as popularity of its fitness tracker fades. And this weekend on Bloomberg TV, we bring you our best interviews from the week, including our exclusive conversation with Forerunner Ventures founder and managing director Kirsten Green, her outlook on e-commerce as consolidation heats up. Tune in this Saturday for the best of Bloomberg Tech. This is Bloomberg. In today's funding board, we're looking at South Korea's Kakao. TPG is leading a $437 million investment in a ride-hailing startup to be spun out of the social media giant. This effectively throws its weight behind a competitor to Uber, which the private equity firm also backs. The investment gives Kakao a cash infusion to further expand its online portfolio. The spin-off, to be called Kakao Mobility, aims to roll out new services, including corporate taxis, parking, and automatic payments. Well, the global wearables market is expected to grow about 20% this year, with over 125 million devices expected to ship. This according to researcher IDC. Now, a company vying to capture some of that market share is Fitbit. The San Francisco-based company is betting big on its upcoming smartwatch as popularity of its fitness tracker dwindles. But the company may already be facing major hurdles with its upcoming device, months away from its debut, putting the company's most important product in years in peril. Joining us now from New York, Bloomberg technology reporter Selena Wang, who covers Fitbit. Selena, tell us what you've been finding out about this particular unit.
So Fitbit has a lot riding on this new smartwatch as part of their turnaround strategy, as their core business has been really struggling. But I've been learning from sources that they've just been facing one hurdle after another. They had originally been planning for a spring launch, which has now been pushed to the fall because of issues with figuring out the GPS tracking, with making it completely waterproof. And now I'm hearing that from these sources that they may not be ready to have an app store in time for the launch, which is something that James Park has been talking about for a long time. Now, this app store is a pretty key component of the smartwatch, given that it makes it more useful for consumers, and it's something that its competitors are going to have.
What are employees saying about the product's prospects?
Sources are telling me that there's a lot of skepticism internally that this is going to really match up to the competition. Fitbit has already fallen behind Apple and Xiaomi in the wearables market in general, and the Apple Watch has been really picking up steam. Now, it looks like the price point is going to be similar to the Apple Watch, but it looks like a lot of the features aren't going to be quite up to par. So there's a lot of skepticism that they can really build the ties that they need to with the developer community and get the market share that they need.
Fitness trackers are actually sinking in popularity across the board, right? This isn't unique to Fitbit.
Definitely, fitness trackers are starting to see a lot of saturation in the market, and that's why Fitbit's been struggling so much. And so the smartwatch is supposed to be their really big turnaround strategy. But if you talk to developers and you ask them, okay, are you excited about the prospect of a new platform to develop on? There's just not a lot of enthusiasm. And part of it is that developing for smartwatches in general is a very difficult thing to do. It's a smaller interface. There's a lot more constraints that developers have to deal with. And given the option between developing for an enormous platform like Apple or Android, which one are you going to go with? And developers are saying that it's going to take a lot to convince them to want to develop for the Fitbit.
To what extent is the success of the Apple Watch, even if it's muted, hurting Fitbit?
It's definitely hurting Fitbit. I mean, Fitbit had been planning to have this smartwatch compete with the Apple II watch, but by the time this watch comes out, it's probably going to be competing with the Apple III watch, which is problematic because that watch is going to have even more features. It's going to be even more updated. The value of a smartwatch right now is really tied to the ecosystem of devices and apps that surrounds it. So part of what makes the Apple Watch so attractive is that it's tied to the iPhone and it works seamlessly with the device. Fitbit doesn't have that already created ecosystem. It's going to have to build it all, not to mention also have to build this app store from scratch, which is quite a technical challenge.
So then what edge, if any, would a Fitbit smartwatch have on competitors? Why buy it?
So Fitbit does have a pretty large installed base of users. It has that demographic of more fitness-focused people who maybe want this watch as something that's a little bit more fitness and health-focused wearable in general. The other potential advantage of building its own operating system is that it's not Android or iPhone platform-specific users, so it could target both types of users, but at the same time it means that it doesn't have those existing developer ties if it were to stick with an Android operating system.
All right, Selena Wang, great stuff on Fitbit today, our Bloomberg Tech reporter there. Thanks so much. Coming up, Apple celebrated the 10th anniversary of its iPhone this week. A look at the smartphone's impact over the last decade, plus other headlines that grabbed our attention in the week in tech. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. Police say the gunman and at least one other person are dead after a man wearing a lab coat opened fire inside New York City's Bronx Lebanon Hospital. Several others have been wounded. No word yet on a motive. Police say he may have been a former employee. President Trump says a change of tactics is now necessary for dealing with North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missiles programs. He spoke today alongside South Korean President Moon Jae-in at the White House.
The era of strategic patience with the North Korean regime has failed. Many years, and it's failed. And frankly, that patience is over.
Trump also said the U.S. is renegotiating what had been a rough trade deal with South Korea. Meantime, next month, the U.K. and U.S. will open negotiations on a trade deal. President Trump has told U.K.'s Prime Minister Theresa May it will be able to keep trading with the U.S. on at least the same terms as it does now. Russia's foreign minister hopes that, quote, pragmatism will prevail at the upcoming talks between President Vladimir Putin and President Trump. Both are expected to meet on the sidelines of next week's G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. And Germany has joined other EU nations in legalizing gay marriage. Lawmakers approved the legislation after Chancellor Angela Merkel unexpectedly dropped her party's traditional objection to same-sex unions. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says progress has been made, and it's been slow, though, in talks to unify Cyprus. It was split in 1974 when Turkey invaded. Guterres arrived in Switzerland on the third day of talks and says outstanding issues remain.
All participants have declared that they are here to find a solution. They have also demonstrated their own awareness of this historic opportunity and the responsibility they share for a successful outcome. And I call on the leaders and the other participants in the conference to heed the call for peace of thousands of Cypriots at rallies on the island this week.
In France, former presidential candidate Marine Le Pen has been charged with misappropriation of funds. The National Front leader and other party members are accused of improperly paying aides with funds from the European Union. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. The global threat of ransomware came to the forefront this week as a new cyber attack hit dozens of countries across the globe. But there are still questions about the origins of the attack and what exactly the goal was behind this massive breach. We discussed our latest, plus other tech headlines grabbing the attention this week with Bloomberg Tech reporter Alex Webb and our Bloomberg Tech editor, Tom Giles.
Right now, it's about exactly how much did they get and how much were our operations disrupted. You saw a wide range of, this wasn't a traditional ransomware, give us money, we'll give you back your data. It seems now, based on the security experts that we've talked to, this was more about disruption of infrastructure, specifically things like shipping. Maersk, this big Danish shipping company, one of the world's largest, if not the world's largest, they were, they're getting their goods to ports was screwed up because of their data got locked. They're still assessing just how big the impact was. WPP, the advertising company, FedEx, they said that they may have a material impact on one of their shipping businesses as a result of this. So these are the attackers becoming more sophisticated, using something that looked like ransomware, it looked like WannaCry, it looked like give us Bitcoin, we'll give you, but seems to be much more than that. How can we disrupt infrastructure?
Interestingly, and the attacks range from Russia to the U.S. to Europe, and specifically, the motivation seems to be to wreak havoc in Ukraine.
Well, it's hard to say it's hard to define exactly what region they wanted to wreak havoc in because it was widespread. We got reports on grain shipments in Latin America, for example. It started to affect parts of India. How much was it targeted on Ukraine, and how much of this is just a collateral damage? It's hard to say because we don't know who's behind it just yet. What we do know is each one of these attacks, they're learning from it. They're learning, okay, how can we disrupt this? How can we take what we learned here and apply it to the next one?
Also, huge story out of Europe, Google getting slapped with a $2.7 billion fine from the EU, a record fine, really. Talk to us about the fallout from this.
I mean, there have been question marks about Google's propensity and willingness to give its businesses priority in search results. And this was particularly relating to online shopping. Now, there's been a certain echo beyond this. People are wondering what that means for the rest of Google's business. We know the whole Alphabet universe is quite extensive and it has its fingers in a lot of different pies. And there was perhaps the expectation that maybe Google will start to parlay more of these businesses into its search results and see a sort of snowball effect on how it's able to capitalize on these different industries. This perhaps puts a certain blinker on that, checker on that to hinder their ability to do that. But the one caveat is prior examples of these kind of fines have ended up in years-long court cases and ultimately not yet reached conclusion. I think IBM, I think, is the other example in this space. Or is it Intel? Intel. Apologies. Yeah. So Intel has had a similar example, and they've been in the courts for 8 years as a consequence.
What are Google's options right now?
Google, first of all, $2.7 billion to Google, not a lot of money. This is a company that has a lot of cash hoard. The bigger thing is how do they change their behavior? And they do have a ticking clock right now. They have 60 days to start showing that they are making good on what Margrethe Vestager, the EU antitrust commissioner, wants them to do. So they're going to have to change the way in Europe you access shopping. So right now, Google shopping results appear very high on your search page. It's very lucrative real estate. Other shopping comparison sites are much lower. So Google has the option to kind of bring those up a bit, maybe give them more prominence without charging those shopping sites. On the other hand, they could kind of go back in time. We talked about, the 10 blue links from 10 years ago and beyond. Do you just take it and sort of take away the prominence that you're giving to your own sites? My sense is that they're going to do some sort of a compromise where they give their own stuff prominence, but also start to elevate some of these other shopping comparisons.
And of course, there are other investigations ongoing, specifically one pertaining to Android that we will be watching. Also want to point out 10th anniversary of the iPhone. This week, we had Gene Munster on the show who talked about how he believes iPhone sales are going to peak in 2019 and be replaced by augmented reality glasses, at least at some point. He believes that that's going to be Apple's next big product. Alex, what do you make of that?
I mean, it's the one thing, as you saw in the interview with Tim Cook, the CEO, he's very, very bullish on augmented reality. And we're starting to see perhaps how this roadmap of Apple's is formulating. That they've unveiled ARKit, which is their tool to allow developers to build augmented reality functionality into their apps, which go into the iPhone. And that suggests, and we've reported that Apple is working on some glasses, some smart glasses of some sort, which perhaps could surface over the next couple of years. But it builds a kind of runway towards that. If they can have a whole palette of augmented reality software going into their hardware, with their already existing hardware, it sets them up quite nicely for something a couple of years down the line. The thing is super interesting with the 10-year anniversary. I think there are two elements here. It's the constant question, what's Apple's next big thing? 10 years after the iPhone, they're still, it still accounts for something like 63% of their total sales. Now, the other thing you've got to think about with the iPhone, I think this is one thing that maybe people don't talk about as often as they ought to, is that Apple's ability to keep the iPhone priced as a premium product is one of the things which massively changed the technology industry. If you think about PlayStations and consoles of the past, their decline over 3 or 4 years in price, and then the next one will come along and they'd prop it up a little bit. Well, Apple was able for year after year after year to keep the average sales price for the iPhone increasing. There's whispers that the next iPhone could be priced above $1,000. Given the first iPhone was $500, that's quite a remarkable trend.
So what's in store for the next 3 years of the iPhone? I know we're expecting a new redesign this fall, but then what next?
Well, people talk about a super cycle, right? Every 2 years they come up with a new flagship iPhone, and with each time there's a little new fillip and boost it to sales. Now, the iPhone which comes later this year, there is an expectation, or at least a hope from investors that that is the case. The ability then to add some sort of iterative or incremental improvements for the next generation will prop it up, and perhaps by then they will be ready to unveil their huge AR product if there is one. That's the kind of ramp which I think investors are hoping that the whole product development is leading towards.
That was Bloomberg Technology's Alex Webb and Tom Giles. Well, a new Tesla warning from Morgan Stanley analyst Adam Jonas, saying he is now seeing risk from the automaker's exposure in China, which he sees as, quote, a greater source of competition than demand. Jonas was a perennial Tesla bull, but downgraded shares in May on the threat of competition from larger tech companies, including Apple. He reiterated that downgrade after our exclusive interview in which Apple CEO Tim Cook elaborated on Apple's ambitions when it comes to cars. Coming up, space startup Planet claims it now has the largest operating fleet of satellites in the world, with over 140 of them in orbit. We'll hear from CEO Will Marshall on what's next for the company, and check out TV Go, our new interactive TV function on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live. If you miss an interview, you can go back to it. You can send our producers a message, play along with the charts we bring you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. How do you walk that line
when you're in the middle of a crisis situation?
It's really all about enabling people. Technology needs to serve everyone.
but at the end of the day, it's all about emotional decision.
I think there's huge innovation left in music.
The hallmark of a truly great leader is that great is never great enough.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best.
President Trump has signed an executive order to form a National Space Council, which will be led by Vice President Mike Pence. This will revive a council that was last in place in 1993. President Trump says the revival of the Space Council sends a clear message to the world that the United States continues to lead in the space race. Trump says space exploration would help the economy and national security. Staying on the topic of space, one startup that is upgrading the technology that orbits the Earth is Planet. Earlier this year, Planet successfully launched 88 shoebox-sized satellites, which they call Doves, into space. That makes them the operator of the largest satellite fleet in history, with 142 total. Here with me now in the studio, Will Marshall, CEO and co-founder of Planet. So right now, 142 Planet satellites are orbiting the Earth. What are they all doing?
These 142 satellites are imaging the whole planet's landmass once per day. So historically, satellites have taken pictures of the Earth, but taken a few years to take a snapshot of the whole planet. With 142, we can take a snapshot every day and see changes as they happen around the planet.
So what are the actual use cases?
Well, there's a wide variety of industries that are interested in this, from agriculture, where we can help improve crop yields, to finance, actually, where lots of we can help understand commodities that are being traded, whether it's ships into and out of ports, output from all the world's mines, stockpiles, oil levels, all that sort of stuff.
And you are sharing your data with all of these different industries?
Yeah, so we work with agricultural companies, we work with the consumer mapping companies, we work with finance companies. We just did our first couple of deals in the finance sector.
Now, you get so much data. How do you comb through it all?
Yeah, we get about 7 terabytes of data per day. About 1 million images come down from these satellites to our ground stations all around the world. And, well, the important thing is now there's machine learning analytics that can be applied to that data. Satellite imagery used to be the province of just governments and big companies, but nowadays, by applying machine learning, the smaller companies and different industries can get access to this data and can make it useful for themselves by more being able to just query it. How many trees are there in the Amazon? How many ships are there in the ports?
So give us some more specific examples of what is possible now that this technology is more affordable.
Well, take deforestation. It used to be the thing that at the end of a few years we'd wake up and there's a big hole in the Amazon. Now we can literally count every tree on the planet every day and track deforestation.
So talk to me about your longer term plans. What's next?
Well, we continue to improve the satellite technology in space. So in just 2 weeks' time, we're launching another 48 satellites on a Russian Soyuz rocket. And then later in the summer, another 6 high-resolution satellites on a Minotaur rocket. So we'll keep on improving the technology in space. But perhaps more importantly now, what matters is the data that we're getting down and making it useful for people. And that we're doing by adding machine learning technologies to that to make it simpler for people to ask the questions that they want and get that out of the imagery.
Now, Ashley Vance, our Bloomberg colleague who has a great piece on Planet out in this week's issue of Bloomberg Business Week, talks about how the relationships between humans and space is changing because technology has advanced so quickly. There's also a new ecosystem of space startups. What kind of space startups do you think will succeed and what won't?
That's a great question. I think that there's a green field of opportunity because of the changing cost point and being able to put in more capability in each kilogram that we put up to space. That's what's really changed by several orders of magnitude. A massive disruption in the industry enables you to put these hundreds of satellites up. They could be used for better GPS. They could be used for better communication. Communication satellites able to get internet to the couple of billion people that don't have internet. They could be used, like our company does, to take more rapid imagery to help us to take care of the planet. So there's a wide variety of use cases. I think we're only just seeing the beginning of a big phase shift in space to large fleets of satellites that do lots of things to help us here on planet Earth.
And how do you navigate geopolitical issues?
Well, our data is very relevant geopolitically. I think it's super important that during the whole space era, this was typically just the province of the government. But now we're seeing private enterprise being able to get into there. And that's enabling a lot more commercial applications of the technology and humanitarian applications of the technology, not just the former government use cases. And so that really broadens up. It democratizes access to space, really.
And do you plan to take this company public? Are you going to raise more money?
Ultimately, I think this is a standalone public company, absolutely.
All right. Fascinating and great video there of the satellites at work. Will Marshall, CEO of Planet, thanks so much for joining us. Another story we are watching, Facebook's internet beaming drone completed its second test flight. The goal is for the aircraft, Aquila, to bring internet to rural places across the globe. The test flight clocked in at 1 hour and 46 minutes. Now that's about 10 minutes longer than its original flight. And perhaps more importantly, Facebook says the drone landed perfectly in the Arizona desert. Coming up, we'll talk about album releases as superstar Jay-Z's first album in 4 years drops on the streaming site Tidal. Can the music industry continue to adapt to digital streaming? And a programming note, tune in to Bloomberg on July 4th, 8 p.m. Eastern. Alex Steele, Carol Masser, Matt Miller will be co-hosting the Boston Pops Fireworks Spectacular live from Boston's historic Esplanade. This is Bloomberg. Rapper and entrepreneur Jay-Z released his 13th album, the first in 4 years, on his streaming service Tidal. It will be exclusively on the platform. Now this has become the new norm for artists like Kanye West, Beyonce. But how does this practice impact others in the music industry? David Israelite, National Music Publishers Association CEO, spoke with Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn and Anna Edwards.
The music industry has experienced growth the last few years, mostly because of streaming services. We really have become a streaming industry in everything but name. I think the economics still haven't been worked out properly so that songwriters and artists are getting a fair share. But the growth in streaming is definitely saving the industry.
How much more of a share do artists and songwriters need to get, David? And how far are you down the track of persuading the streamers to make that happen?
Well, we're a ways away. The problem for songwriters is, unfortunately, they're not in a free market. They don't get to negotiate the value of their songs with these services. It's regulated by the federal government. But I think it will improve in the near future. And I'm just excited to see so many companies invest in the music business by wanting to enter the streaming market.
Well, there are two ways to look at it, right? I mean, Tidal entering, nobody wanted to embrace Tidal in the beginning. None of the artists were that interested because it wasn't doing so well, because Spotify, Pandora, all these other services had already taken market share. Now, the artists are signing exclusively to a particular streaming service. Down the road, that could be really, really bad for the artists that aren't big names, no?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot less of the exclusives on one particular streaming service. And in fact, even the Jay-Z album, a lot was made about it being exclusively on Tidal, but I think that's only for a week. I think the trend is that you're going to start seeing this music on all the services. And it's great that you have so many large companies want to be in this space. I mean, 3 of the 5 largest companies in the world, Apple, Amazon, and Google, operate music streaming services. And then you have other companies like Spotify, like Pandora, like Tidal. And so we don't mind lots of competition. What seems to be the most important part of this is that consumers are embracing the idea of paid streaming. And if that's done in a high enough volume, then the decline of the sales models isn't really going to be the problem that people thought it was, because there's going to be growth opportunities with paid streaming models.
Before paid streaming models, David, took off in the way that they have, and whilst we witnessed the decline of physical music sales, live events sort of stepped up, didn't they? And artists were getting more money from those. Is that something that we still see happening? And what's the share of their incomes that comes from that side of the business at the moment?
Very much so. For an artist, the live performance revenue is a significant part of the equation. Unfortunately, for many songwriters, they don't perform live, and so that's not an income source for them. And so I'm very happy to see the growth in the streaming, and in particular, the paid streaming model, because there's a huge difference between services like YouTube and the Spotify free service in terms of the economics versus the services where the consumer actually pays.
So, David, you seem to be happy with everything so far. So what are you writing to President Trump about?
Well, I'd like to see the prices that we get paid from these services actually negotiated in a free market. You know, you've got giant companies like Amazon that sells Prime memberships and Echo devices, or Apple that sells phones, or Google, as we've just learned from Europe, sells everything. And the music is an important part of these companies' ecosystems.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the amount of money that they're sharing with the creators isn't proportional to the value of the music to their companies.
David Israelite there, National Music Publishers Association CEO on Bloomberg Markets. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We will be back on Monday, just ahead of the 4th of July holiday. James Chalkbach with Moniz Crespi and Hart will be on the show discussing his latest report on how Amazon may be eyeing the restaurant industry. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.